actual full name is Robert Allen Berg, but of course, in America, Robert is Bob. I was born in 1951, April 7th, in Brooklyn, New York. A wonderful place to be born. Actually, in the 50s, it was quite nice. My mother is an Italian-American descendant. My father, they think, or I've heard, was of Russian-Jewish descent. So it was a Jewish and Italian home I was raised in. I had an amazing kind of mixture of cultures within me, which I thought was very good. It allowed me to just to experience, you know, different sides of life. Brooklyn was really a spawning ground for a lot of musicians, actors, you know, I mean, a lot of famous people came out of Brooklyn. In fact, when I was growing up, people spoke of Manhattan, and they still do, as the city. So people that lived in Brooklyn really looked at Manhattan as another place, as the city, and the little areas and the little neighborhoods in Brooklyn were like very provincial at the time. So you had in those little areas a very kind of authentic air of the different ethnic groups that were existing there. But yeah, it was a great place to grow up. Also, I grew up near a place called Coney Island. I was very close to Coney Island, which was an amusement park that was very popular in the 20s and 30s. And as I was growing up, there was still a bit of the mystique of Coney Island. It was a great place to grow up in the 50s. It was very amusing, you know. Yeah, my first instrument was classical piano, and I loved it. I mean, right away I took to it immediately. I really enjoyed playing it. I practiced. I spent time with it until I was probably maybe 10 or 11 years old. I played piano. At that point, you know, it was just reading the notes and trying to learn to play the instrument. Although I remember, even at that early age, having the impulse to improvise a bit, although I had no idea what to do or how to do it or, you know, what direction to go. But I remember sitting, you know, kind of dreaming at the piano. So I guess I had the bug in me early on, you know. remember when I asked my father to get me the current John Coltrane record, because I had heard about John Coltrane, and he brought home A Love Supreme, which was the current record. That was John Coltrane's latest record. And when he brought that home and I heard that, it really made a big impression on me. It made such a big impression on me that it changed my life, actually. It completely changed my life. I heard A Love Supreme, and I heard Live at Birdland, which has this tune Alabama on it. And when I heard that music, I really was so completely overtaken by the music that, you know, I really became obsessed with it then. When I was 12 or 13 years old, I became very ill with a stomach disease, which actually put me out for a while. I mean, I got so sick that I had to stop going to school for a bit of time, and I couldn't do anything, really. I mean, I was really sick. So they knocked me down one notch into what they called the music class. When I finally got to that class, they told me that they needed a saxophone player. So just by chance, I got assigned to play the saxophone. To me, the saxophone is, of all the horns, is maybe the closest thing to a human voice. I mean, when I think of singers that I really like, I mean, I'm a big Frank Sinatra freak. I mean, Frank Sinatra is one of my favorite musicians of all time, and actually, his voice is really close to the range of the tenor saxophone. But yeah, I think the vocal quality of the instrument is the thing that I'm most attracted to. It's not only the actual instrument and the mouthpiece and the reed that are working together, but I think it's the person's body itself that is a resonator for the instrument. So, yeah, I mean, I mean, I love playing the saxophone. I mean, for me, it just seems very natural. So, you know, it seemed natural right from the start. So I'm a quick study with the saxophone. You know, the saxophone came very easily to me. Thank goodness, you know. I went to junior high school in Brooklyn, then I went to a high school called High School of Performing Arts, which was a music school, again a public music school. I spent 3 years there. It was basically, you know, like a vocational school for musicians, actors and dancers. And then I went to the Juilliard School for a year because my folks thought it would be a good idea for me to go to college. When I was at the end of my first year in Juilliard, I forget, somebody recommended me, there's an organ player named Jack McDuff, who was, you know, still pretty popular at that time. Good organ player, actually, very good organ player. And somewhere down the line, Jack McDuff needed a saxophone player. I got recommended, they called me, Jack called me to come to his house and play a couple of tunes, basically like an audition. And he liked my playing, I guess, so he hired me. So here I was, 18 years old, at the end of my first year of Juilliard, and I quit school to join Jack McDuff's band. So I went on the road with Jack, and I remember the first gig we had in a place called the Cadillac Club, which was a club in New Jersey, which I later wrote a tune about, you know, many years later. If I would have stayed on that gig, I would have learned a lot, but because I was so arrogant and so headstrong, I decided to go back to New York and see what I could get into. So I quit. I decided to get what we called at the time a day gig. So I got a taxi driver license and I drove a cab for a year. Well, I tell you, the taxis in London are definitely more comfortable than taxis in New York, that's for sure. In New York, you feel like you're in a war zone when you're in a taxi cab, but I spent a year driving a taxi in New York, so, you know, it's not so unfamiliar to me. But I was 19 when I did that, so. I drove only at night, you know, it was like that movie Taxi Driver, you know, I mean, I only drove at night. During the day was not really for me, and I had the freedom to go wherever I wanted. It was, actually, when I saw the movie, the Scorsese movie, it really hit home for me because I did that for a living, you know, and I really understood what it's like to be out there and dealing with all these strange people, and I don't think it took anything away from me. I think, if anything, it just, in a certain way, it was good because it showed me that, I mean, somehow the independence of being away from music and knowing that I could make it on my own, not playing the saxophone, helped me, in a certain way, be a more independent, thinking, and stronger musician. I had been meeting musicians around New York already at this point. It was in the late 60s, and when I was at Juilliard, actually, I met Steve Grossman. He was also at Juilliard at the time. And through Steve, I got to meet Liebman and the Breckers and a bunch of guys who were playing around New York. I mean, basically the musical community. I got introduced to the musical community through Steve, who, you know, was basically the same age as I, maybe a year older than me, and, you know, we were kind of contemporaries. I learned a lot. I learned a lot from other musicians. I learned a lot by just playing and jamming. It was the time of what they call the loft scene. Everybody had, you know, these big kind of industrial spaces that we lived in. You could play, I mean, I could play 24 hours where I lived. I had a set of drums, I had a piano, and 24 hours, I mean, we could play whenever we wanted. We'd play all night sometimes, you know. in the middle of all this, I got recommended to play with, to audition for Horace Silver's band. This was in 1973. I wasn't even particularly looking for a gig because I had a job, you know, driving a truck at the time. And I remember Mike Brecker left Horace Silver's band at the time, so, you know, I think like, I don't know how many guys auditioned. Horace used to audition a lot of guys. I mean, you know, in those days, when people were looking for musicians, at least when somebody like Horace was looking for a musician, he'd have like 20 saxophone players come to a rehearsal studio, and he'd, I think, you know, try like 5 guys at a time come into the room and play. It was not the most comfortable situation, you know. Anyway, Horace liked the way I played, so, and actually at the rehearsal, Alvin Queen was playing drums in the band, and Tom Harrell was playing trumpet. In a few days, we went on the road and started to work. So that was, I always think of Horace Silver as my first real gig. And I stayed with Horace for 3 years. For me, I mean, I always feel like Horace Silver and Horace Silver's gig were my education. That was my educational years. Those were the years that I was able to get my skills together as a musician and really be able to become professional. In '83, I think it was, I took some time off from playing music. I just needed to rest and kind of straighten my life out a little bit and, you know, kind of take stock and really, I needed to slow down certain things and certain aspects of my life. So I took like 3 months off. And also at that point, I got married and started a family, and you know, I actually lived in Sweden for a while. My wife was living in Sweden. I went to live there. I just needed to get away from the whole scene because I was getting involved in certain things that were just becoming a little bit distracting. Consequently, I came back to New York, I think in early '84, and just as I came back to New York, I was still doing some gigs with Cedar Walton. I think just a few days after I got back to New York, Al Foster called me and told me that Miles was interested in me. And a few hours later, the management, Miles' manager, called me and asked if I could show up at a rehearsal in a couple of days. I went to the rehearsal. I met Miles, played a little bit, and actually that was it. Nobody said anything to me. A couple of days later, I got a call from the management again, saying that Miles wanted me to join the band, to come on the road. So that was it. I mean, I started working with Miles then in '84. You know, the thing that I took away from Miles's gig more than anything was I got to hear Miles play every night for like 3 years, you know, when we were working. And there were times when he really played brilliantly, because when he first came back in the early 80s, his chops and his physical being were not that strong. When I joined the band, I was amazed at how good he was playing. I mean, he was really playing his ass off. And just to be able to hear Miles play was like very inspiring. Sonny Rollins, one of my all-time heroes. Sonny Rollins, I mean, I spent so many years listening to Sonny Rollins. I feel personally my style has been very influenced by Sonny. First, you know, when I heard Charlie Parker, I was amazed. And Charlie Parker became my #1 influence in the beginning. I was playing alto. And then when I heard Coltrane, I was really impressed. I really, you know, wanted to know what that was about. And then shortly after I heard Train, I heard Sonny. And I was just so knocked out by Sonny's, it was so different than Train, you know. It was another language than Train was using, but it was just as heavy and just as intense and just as deep and just as incredible in terms of playing the instrument. The first time I heard Farrell was at the Fillmore East with play with Coltrane's band. And actually, when I heard the whole band at that time, I really didn't particularly understand what they were doing. Consequently, in years later, I got to know Farrell a little bit, and I mean, understand that Farrell can play very in too, you know. And I think I've heard Farrell play. I think if anybody can get a similar kind of a spirit in the music, I mean, sometimes I can hear that in Farrell's music. I was always a great admirer of Chick Corea's music. I mean, Chick to me is, you know, again, on the level of, you know, some of the greatest musicians. And still, I mean, to this day, I mean, I really admire Chick's music. But to get to play with Chick, I think I look back on it as being really another great experience educationally. In certain ways, I learned more playing with Chick than with anybody else in my career. Because Chick is one guy who, aside from being a great composer and pianist, will really challenge you.
Well, New Waltz is actually a composition of mine. And I really heard it to be played with the sound of Bob Berg playing the soprano saxophone, which he plays beautifully on New Waltz.
I met Randy actually in somewhere in Brooklyn in some funky basement, and actually Mike and Randy were both there. You know, again, it was the time when I was just meeting guys, so I was meeting so many musicians, you know, and I had heard about them, of course, you know, they already had, people knew about them, but they were young. I mean, I think Mike was, you know, maybe 19, I'm a couple of years younger, I was maybe 17 when I first met those guys, and Randy's a couple of years older. So I went on the road with Randy's band, and it was a great band. David Kikoski was playing piano, and Joey Barron was on drums, who was a great drummer. And I got to know Randy a little bit at that time, and we had a great time. And we went on the road for a couple of months. We did a recording live at Sweet Basil, and you know, that's when I got to know Randy and got to play his music. I mean, because Randy's a great composer too, and not only a great trumpet player. when I was with Miles, Mike Stern came back into Miles's band for a while, and I had known Mike kind of peripherally. We played a couple of gigs in Boston together. We got to know each other when Mike moved to New York, and we became friends. We really hit it off. I mean, Mike and I finally decided to, you know, really make the commitment and put a band together. We really wanted to do something hard-hitting, which we did. I mean, I remember playing in festivals where people that had to follow that band just were like completely freaked out because the band was so strong and so intense, you know, that it was a very hard band to follow. Rainy night in London. What is that for? When I'm on the road and I'm working, I feel most alive. That's no doubt. I mean, I definitely feel like this is what I'm meant to do. Being on the road, it can be tiring, although I notice that when I'm on the road, after I'm on the road for about a week, my adrenaline goes up. So I'm much more flexible in what I can deal with, and I have a lot of energy. I mean, I have more energy when I'm on the road than any other aspect of my life. Always looking for new hotels. I don't think that I'm particularly inspired in any way by being in different places. You know, if I'm in Japan, I'm not thinking like, oh, this is a different culture, I'm inspired to write a different way. I'm not that kind of person. I mean, I'm almost the kind of a person who I maintain this kind of a consistency in my life no matter where I am. That's what I need to do to protect whatever I need to protect in terms of keeping my spirit on a certain level. You know, so I think what happens to a lot of musicians is I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I think we become insulated in a certain aspect. And, you know, because your life as a musician is so internal and it's so emotional, I mean, you're dealing with emotions on a regular basis. And music is a very emotional experience. I mean, it's a very emotional world to be in. So you have to kind of protect this part of yourself in a certain way. I mean, I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean it in a positive sense. But I don't feel particularly influenced or inspired by any particular places. I can't imagine like sitting around and listening to myself play. I mean, it's like you do an album, you play on the album, you put the album together, you do whatever, you know, you write for the album or you arrange things for the album. And then once it's done, it's done. It's gone. It's over. It's like on to the next thing. You know, I did a bunch of records with Cedar Walton, some of which are really good. There's a series of live records from the Montmartre Club in Copenhagen that are like cult records. People really like them. And I just recently heard one, and it sounded really good. I think the first record of any importance that I did was a record called Short Stories, which is on the Denon record label. And that one I felt was an important record for me. I just feel like a record is such a moment in time, you know. I prefer performing. People have commented about the intensity of my performances at times. People used to say, you know, angry tenors, you know, in the 60s, you know, they used to talk about the guys on the East Coast being like the angry tenor players and the guys on the West Coast, like, you know, the West Coast sound. You know, there used to be this, like, dichotomy of sounds. I mean, I was always attracted to intense kind of music and intense playing, and I think part of what I have to offer is that intensity. But I also feel, as I said, that you can be just as intense with playing very few notes. To me, what's important about the music is the intention, you know, the actual, what's behind the actual musical statements. So I feel like Stan Getz's music is just as intense as Sonny Rollins' music. It's just a different language, you know. And I guess I just feel like I'm trying to find other ways, you know, more ways to, with less notes and with less pyrotechniques to say the same thing, you know. And I mean, now that I'm a little older, I'm finding other ways to do that. I mean, I don't feel the need to go as nuts as I did when I was younger. You know, I'm not a religious person, but I always equate music with the spiritual aspect of my life. I feel like my ties with the spiritual world come through music. In other words, that's the way I can plug in. The purpose of music is to elevate one's consciousness and elevate one's spiritual level. That's the kind of music I want to hear, and that's the kind of music I want to play, the music that does that. The entertainment kind of music, the pop music, the music that's made as a product, I'm not interested in. And the older I get and the more clear I get on what I like, the less I want to hear that stuff. And the more I want to hear the thing that's really dealing with the spirit and the soul.